The moment I stepped into the glittering wedding hall, my heart swelled with pride and trembling joy. For years, I had dreamed of this day, dreamed of watching my only daughter walk down the aisle with her veil flowing behind her, dreamed of seeing her smile light up the room as she started her new life. My hands clutched the gift I had chosen so carefully, something simple yet meaningful, wrapped in white paper with a satin bow. I thought it was a symbol of love, a reminder that her mother had never stopped believing in her. But before I could even take another step inside, my eyes froze on a board propped against the entrance table. The names of the guests shimmered in gold calligraphy, elegant and welcoming. Row after row, relatives, friends, colleagues. Then I saw mine. My chest tightened as though an iron fist had gripped my ribs. Beside my name was a message, written, not in gold but in harsh, bold red letters. Not welcome here. The words stabbed through me like a knife. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. Surely, someone had made a mistake. But as I leaned closer, I realized the cruelty was intentional. My daughter, my flesh and blood, the one I raised with every ounce of strength I had chosen this humiliation for me. The chatter of the guests behind me blurred into meaningless noise. The laughter, the music, the scent of roses and perfume, it all faded. All I could see were those 3 words branding me as an outsider, as someone unworthy of standing in the place where my daughter was celebrating the happiest day of her life. My hand trembled. The gift I held nearly slipped from my grasp. Tears stung my eyes, not the tears of joy I had expected, but tears of grief and betrayal. I had imagined arriving with pride, but instead I stood there like a broken woman. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my shaking legs. And as I turned away, unable to step further inside, a cold thought took root in my mind. They thought they could erase me from this day. They thought they could write me off as if I were nothing. But the story was far from over. By morning, they would discover what it truly meant to abandon the woman who had given them everything. I left the hall that night with my head bowed, but the memories flooding my mind were not just of the cruel sign. They were memories of sacrifices no one had seen, of long nights when I worked 2 jobs just to put food on the table, of cold winters when I went without a coat so my daughter could have one. They had forgotten the roots that held them steady. They had erased my love from the script of their lives. I want you to understand how deep the betrayal ran, so let me take you back. Let me tell you the story of how a mother's love was twisted into shame, and how a heart that only wanted to give was shattered in the most public way. When my daughter was born, I was 21 and already alone. Her father had vanished the moment he learned I was pregnant. I raised her with trembling hands and a burning determination. There were nights when I went hungry so she could eat. Days when I walked miles to work because I could not afford the bus fare. But through every struggle, I held her in my arms and whispered promises that she would never feel unloved, never feel abandoned. She grew up watching me fight through storms, yet somehow she also grew up seeing me as weak. I thought our bond was unbreakable. I thought the love we shared was eternal. I was wrong. As the years went by, her world grew different from mine. She studied hard, earned scholarships, entered circles I could never dream of joining. At first, I was proud. Then gradually, I began to notice the subtle shifts. The way she hesitated to introduce me to her friends. The way her tone changed when she spoke about my work as a cashier, as if it were something shameful. Still, I forgave her in my heart. I told myself she was young, that one day she would understand what it took to raise her. One day she would see the strength behind the struggle. But that day never came. When she met the man who would become her husband, I felt the distance grow sharper. His family was wealthy, established, proud of their lineage and their reputation. To them, I was nothing but a single mother scraping by. I could see it in their eyes whenever they looked at me, as though I were an embarrassment, a stain on the perfection they tried to project. And still, I showed up with kindness. I smiled at their dinners. I offered to help. I swallowed the insults hidden behind polite laughter. I thought, for my daughter's sake, I could bear it, until the wedding. That night, when I read those words, "not welcome here," I realized they had planned this cruelty carefully. It was not a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a declaration. To the world, to the guests, to me. I did not belong. My heart shattered, but in that very moment another part of me hardened. I could walk away broken, yes, but I could also walk away awakened. I remember standing on the street outside the glowing hall. The sounds of the celebration spilled out behind me, music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. I clutched the gift. in my hands, staring at the wrapping until the bow blurred through my tears. My daughter was inside, smiling, dancing, living her dream. And I was on the outside, cast into the shadows. For a brief moment, I wanted to run back inside, to scream, to demand an explanation, but I knew it would be pointless. They had already written my role in their story, the forgotten mother, the charity case, the woman they could erase without consequence. I lifted my head and made a silent vow. If they thought I was powerless, they would soon see how wrong they were, because I was not the woman they believed me to be. I had spent my life hiding truths, shielding my daughter from realities she never knew, working quietly behind the scenes in ways she could never imagine. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, and one day soon, their arrogance would crumble. That night I walked home slowly, each step heavier than the last. People on the street passed me without noticing the storm inside me. To them, I was just another mother in an old dress carrying a wedding gift. But inside, I carried the weight of betrayal, the ashes of love, and the spark of something darker. By the time I reached my small apartment, my tears had dried. I placed the gift on the table, untouched, unopened, and sat in the quiet darkness. My hands clenched into fists. They had broken my heart, but they had also given me clarity. The wedding was not just a celebration. It was a battlefield, and though they believed they had won by erasing me, they had only ignited a fire that would not be easily extinguished. The morning after the wedding humiliation, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the untouched gift. The white wrapping that once symbolized love now felt like an open wound. I could not bring myself to unwrap it. Instead, I let my eyes trace the satin ribbon over and over until my vision blurred. The echoes of laughter from the wedding still rang in my ears, taunting me. My daughter's face smiling under the lights, her arms wrapped around her new family while I was cast out into the cold. As I sat there, memories began to surface like waves crashing against the shore. Memories of all the times I had been pushed aside, all the moments that should have warned me this day would come. Perhaps I had been too blind, too desperate to believe that love alone could hold us together. The first time I felt that sharp sting of being excluded was when my daughter announced her engagement. I remember the phone call vividly. Her voice had been bright, almost trembling with excitement. She told me he had proposed, that the ring sparkled like a star, that she was finally stepping into the life she had always dreamed of. My heart swelled with joy for her, but before I could even ask about the details, her tone shifted. "Mom," she had said carefully, as though each word carried weight, "his family wants to host the engagement party. They think it should be a private event with just close friends and relatives from their side. They don't want to make it too complicated." I remember the pause in her voice, the hesitation before the word complicated. That single word cut deeper than she knew. In their eyes, I was the complication. The single mother from the wrong side of town, the cashier who had never fit into their pristine world of country clubs and designer clothes. I told her it was fine, that I understood, that I would celebrate with her in my own way. But after the call ended, I sat on my bed in the silence of my apartment and felt the weight of loneliness settle on my chest. The second blow came during the bridal shower. I had insisted on being there, had even saved every penny I could to buy her a gift I thought would mean something. A set of pearl earrings, modest but elegant, purchased after weeks of putting away spare change from groceries. I had wrapped them in a delicate velvet box and walked into the venue with trembling hands. The room had been filled with women dressed in gowns that looked like they had stepped off the pages of a magazine. Their laughter was sharp, their smiles polished. I remember one of them glancing at me, her eyes scanning my dress, which was clean but simple, and then turning to whisper to the woman beside her. Their laughter afterward felt like knives slicing through the air. When my daughter opened the box of earrings, I waited for her smile, for a look of recognition that these were not just pearls but pieces of my sacrifice. Instead, she glanced quickly at the earrings, then at the designer handbags and glittering jewelry stacked around her. "Thank you, Mom," she said softly before setting the box aside. The pearls disappeared into the shadows while the expensive gifts shone under the chandelier. But the worst part came later when I overheard two of the women whispering near the punch table. "She must have bought those from a discount store," one of them said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Poor thing, trying so hard to fit in." They laughed, and though they lowered their voices when they saw me glance their way, the words had already pierced me. Still, I swallowed the pain. I told myself this was just a moment, just the arrogance of strangers. But in my heart, I knew it was more than that. It was the reflection of how my daughter had begun to see me too. The days leading up to the wedding were no kinder. Invitations were sent without my input. Seating arrangements decided without my voice. When I asked if I could help with anything, perhaps baking desserts or setting decorations, I was met with polite refusals. "Everything is already handled, Mom. You don't need to worry about it," my daughter said. Her words were gentle, but her eyes carried something else, a quiet dismissal that stung worse than anger. I wanted to be part of her happiness, to stand beside her in the most important days of her life. Instead, I was treated as though my presence was a burden. One memory stands out more than the rest. It was a dinner at her fiance's family home. The dining room was vast, with ceilings so high I felt as though I were sitting in a cathedral. The tables stretched long, adorned with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. I sat at the far end, quiet, listening as conversations flowed around me like a river. I could not step into Dada T. One point, her future mother-in-law leaned toward me with a smile that was anything but kind. "It must have been very difficult raising a child on your own," she said. "I cannot imagine the sacrifices. But now, she will have everything she deserves, surrounded by a real family, a real family." The words were delivered with sweet poison, the kind of venom hidden in politeness. I nodded and said nothing, but inside, my hands clenched so tightly my nails dug into my skin. After dinner, when I kissed my daughter goodbye, I searched her eyes for reassurance, for some sign that she still saw me as more than an outsider. But all I saw was her nervous glance toward her fiance's family, as though she feared what they would think. And then came the wedding. The sign at the door was not just a message. It was the culmination of every humiliation, every whispered insult, every quiet dismissal. It was the declaration that I no longer belonged in the life I had built for her. I walked away that night broken, but not blind. They believed they had erased me. They believed they had stripped me of power. What they did not know was that years of sacrifice had given me a strength far greater than their wealth. I had survived hunger, loneliness, and abandonment. I had built a life from ashes, and while they mocked me for my simplicity, they had no idea of the truth I carried. As I sat in my kitchen, staring at the wrapped gift, I made another silent vow. They would learn soon enough that the woman they tried to erase was far from powerless. The story of betrayal was only the beginning. The story of reckoning was yet to come. The days after the wedding were the loneliest of my life. My apartment felt colder than ever, the silence pressing against me like a heavy blanket. Each morning, I woke up to the gift still sitting on the table, untouched, as though mocking me. Its ribbon gleamed in the light of the window, but I could not bring myself to open it or throw it away. It had become a symbol of everything I had lost, everything I had been denied. What made it worse was not just the betrayal at the wedding, but the whispers that followed. In a small community, news travels fast. By the second day, neighbors were glancing at me with pity. Some shook their heads when they saw me, pretending to be sympathetic, but their eyes carried something sharper: judgment. They had heard what happened. They had heard that I had been excluded from my own daughter's wedding. At the grocery store, I overheard two women talking near the fruit aisle. They did not know I was behind them. "Imagine that," one whispered. Her own daughter put a sign up saying she was not welcome. "What kind of mother must she be for her child to do that?" The other replied, "I always thought she was odd, raising a child alone like that." Maybe the daughter was embarrassed. These things do not happen without reason. Their words cut through me more deeply than I wanted to admit. I wanted to turn around, to scream that they knew nothing, that they had never walked in my shoes, that they had never spent sleepless nights choosing between paying the electricity bill or buying enough food for the week. But instead, I clenched my jaw and walked away. It was the same everywhere. At the pharmacy, the cashier avoided eye contact, as though my humiliation might be contagious. At church, I noticed people whispering during the sermon, their eyes flicking toward me. Even those who meant well only made it worse. "You must be strong," they said. "Children make their choices. Maybe one day she will come back to you." But I knew better. The wound was too deep. The humiliation too public. The hardest part was when distant relatives began calling. One after another, they reached out, not out of compassion but out of curiosity. "We heard there was trouble at the wedding," one cousin said. "What really happened?" Another asked if it was true that I had caused a scene, as though I had gone there to destroy the day. Lies were already spreading, twisting the truth until I was painted as the problem. I realized then that the sign had not just been meant for me. It had been meant for everyone. It was a message to the world that I was nothing, that I was an embarrassment, to be cast aside. At first, I sank under the weight of it. For days, I barely left my apartment. I cooked small meals, though I barely touched them. I stared at old photographs of my daughter, the ones where she was smiling with cake on her face during birthdays, or holding my hand tightly at her school plays. I wondered how the little girl who once clung to me with love could grow into a woman who could erase me so easily. But grief has a strange way of transforming. What begins as sorrow can harden into something else if given enough time. One evening, I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on. I could hear music in the distance, laughter spilling from a bar down the block. My life had grown so quiet compared to the noise of the world outside. And in that silence, a thought began to take shape. Why should I remain broken? Why should I allow them to decide who I was? They believed they had stripped me of dignity, but dignity does not come from the approval of others. It comes from knowing the truth of what you have endured, from carrying scars that others cannot see. I had carried burdens that would have crushed them. I had raised a child alone with nothing but grit and determination. I had sacrificed more than they could ever imagine, and yet they dared to brand me unworthy. The more I thought about it, the more the sorrow in my chest began to shift into something colder. It was not rage, not yet, but it was the seed of something stronger, a quiet determination that one day, the world would know my side of the story. One day, they would see the truth behind the lies. But the cruelty was not done. A week after the wedding, I received a message from my daughter. My heart leapt when I saw her name on my phone screen. Perhaps she had realized the mistake. Perhaps she had been forced into it by her new family and now wanted to make amends. With shaking hands, I opened the message. Mom, please do not contact me for a while. It is better for everyone if we have some distance. I am starting my new life, and I need to focus on that now. Please respect my wishes. I read the message over and over until the words blurred. No apology, no explanation, just cold distance, as though I were nothing more than a stranger. I wanted to reply, to beg her to remember everything I had done for her. But then I stopped myself. If she had truly chosen this path, then begging would only humiliate me further. So I placed the phone on the table beside the gift, my hands trembling with both sorrow and fury. That night, sleep would not come. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and in the quiet, I began to recall every sacrifice I had ever made. The nights I stayed awake sewing clothes so she would not feel out of place in school. The days I skipped meals so she could eat enough. The winters when I gave her my coat while I shivered in the cold. Every memory that once filled me with pride now burned like fire. And as each sacrifice passed through my mind, I felt the sorrow harden further into determination. They thought I had nothing. They thought I was powerless. But they had no idea what I was capable of. For years, I had kept secrets hidden. I had lived modestly, pretending to be weaker than I was, all for the sake of keeping peace, all for the sake of giving my daughter a chance at a different life. But peace was no longer an option. By casting me out, they had freed me from silence. By humiliating me, they had given me permission to reveal truths I had long buried. I did not know exactly how or when, but I knew one thing with certainty. Their arrogance would not go unpunished. The morning after I read my daughter's message, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my own reflection. My eyes were swollen from nights without sleep, my skin pale, my shoulders hunched from carrying sorrow too long. For years, I had looked at myself and seen only a mother, someone defined by sacrifice. But now, staring at that reflection, I felt something stir. I saw not just a mother, but a woman who had been underestimated, a woman who had been pushed into a corner. Too many times, I touched the mirror with my fingertips and whispered, no more. It began small, a shift in how I carried myself. I no longer avoided the grocery store or the church. I walked through the aisles with my head lifted, ignoring the whispers that followed. Their stares no longer pierced me because I knew something. They did not. They believed I was defeated, but deep inside, I was gathering strength, yet the world seemed determined to test me further. A few weeks after the wedding, I received an invitation in the mail. My heart skipped when I saw the elegant envelope, sealed with gold. For a brief moment, I thought it was an apology, some gesture of reconciliation. But when I opened it, I found it was an invitation to a celebratory dinner hosted by my daughter's new in-laws. The words printed on the card stung like salt on an open wound, celebrating the union of two families, a new beginning of love and legacy. My name was not listed among the honored guests. The envelope had been sent only because it was a mass invitation, a mistake perhaps in their flawless planning. Still, I went. The dinner was held at a grand estate on the edge of town. The kind of mansion that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. The driveway was lined with expensive cars, the windows glittering with warm light. As I walked up the steps, I felt the weight of every eye on me. Some smiled politely, but their smiles were edged with curiosity, as though they wondered why I was there at all. Inside, the air was filled with music and the clinking of glasses. My daughter stood near the center of the room, her hand linked with her husband's, her face glowing. For a moment, my heart softened, seeing her so radiant. But then she looked at me, and her smile faltered. It was not joy that crossed her face but discomfort, almost irritation, as though my presence had ruined her perfect picture. Her mother-in-law approached me with that same practiced smile she had worn at dinner before. "How brave of you to come," she said in a voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I imagine it must be difficult attending events like this when the circumstances are complicated. Complicated. That word again, used like a dagger, wrapped in silk. I wanted to reply, to defend myself, but I bit down on my tongue and offered only a nod. The evening grew worse. As I sat at the table, I noticed my place card did not carry my name but a simple label, guest. No title, no recognition, just an empty placeholder. Around me, others were introduced with pride. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, philanthropists. And then me, the unspoken outsider. At one point, during a toast, my daughter's husband raised his glass and said, "We are so blessed to have been joined not only in love but in family. Tonight, we celebrate with those who represent our future." His eyes swept over the crowd, pausing on his parents, his relatives, his friends. They never once met mine. The applause that followed was thunderous, but in my ears, it was a storm. I excused myself quietly and stepped outside onto the balcony. The night air was cool against my skin, and the stars shimmered above, distant and cold. I leaned against the railing, my chest tight with anger. They had stripped me of a name, of identity, of belonging. They had reduced me to nothing more than a shadow at my own daughter's side. It was then, under the silent stars, that I made a decision. I would not beg to belong. I would not fight for scraps of acknowledgement. Instead, I would build my strength in silence. I would let them believe I was powerless, while in truth, I was gathering every tool, every memory, every secret I had kept locked away. For years, I had hidden parts of myself to protect my daughter from shame. I had concealed truths about her father, about my struggles, even about the resources I had quietly built for myself. They believed I was poor, fragile, and unimportant. They had no idea of the foundation I had quietly laid beneath the surface. I returned home from that dinner with a fire in my chest. That night, I pulled out a box from under my bed. Inside were documents I had not touched in years, bank statements from accounts they did not know existed, property deeds for land I had inherited but never flaunted, letters from people who owed me favors, debts they had long since buried. I spread the papers across my table, staring at the evidence of a life they had underestimated. While they laughed at me for being a cashier, they had no idea of the choices I had made, the quiet investments I had secured, the secrets I had kept safe. But more than wealth, I had something far greater. I had truth. There were stories my daughters' new family would not want revealed, truths they had buried under their polished smiles. I had seen glimpses of them during dinners, overheard conversations they thought I was too insignificant to understand. I knew of debts, of betrayals, of scandals whispered behind closed doors. I had kept silent, thinking it was not my place. But now, I realized silence had only given them power. The plan began to take shape slowly. I did not want rage to guide me. Rage can blind, and I needed clarity. I wanted them to feel what I had felt, not through violence or chaos, but through the unraveling of the image they cherished so dearly. Still, there was pain. That night, after sorting through the documents, I sat by the window and cried silently, because no matter how determined I became, it did not erase the truth that my daughter had chosen them over me. She had watched my humiliation and done nothing. She had allowed them to erase me. But tears are fuel when the heart refuses to break. By morning, my sorrow had dried into resolve. Over the next weeks, I moved carefully. I began by contacting people I trusted, asking small questions, gathering small pieces of information. I learned that my daughter's husband's family was not as flawless as they pretended. Their business had cracks. Their past was not spotless. Each whisper I gathered was like a thread, and slowly, I began to weave them into a tapestry of truth. At the same time, I watched my daughter from a distance. Social gatherings, photographs posted online, stories shared by others. She looked happy, but I could see the strain behind her eyes. She was learning to live under the weight of her in-laws' expectations, molded into someone they approved of. But in molding her, they had carved me out of her life entirely. And so I waited, biding my time, building my strength. Because revenge is not a storm that strikes in haste. It is a tide that rises slowly, silently, until it sweeps everything away. They had written me off as a charity case, a complication, a guest without a name. What they did not know was that I was the storm quietly gathering at their doorstep. The days after the dinner at the grand estate became a turning point. Until then, my revenge had been an idea forming in shadows, a seed of thought not yet given life. But the arrogance I had witnessed, the casual cruelty, the stripping away of my name and identity, had hardened my resolve. I could no longer wait. Action had to begin. One morning, as I sat at my kitchen table staring at the documents I had unearthed, I realized something important. This was not only about reclaiming my dignity. It was about showing them that the world they had built on lies and appearances could crumble as easily as mine had been shattered by a sign at a wedding. But I needed precision. Revenge born from anger alone burns quickly and leaves nothing but ash. What I wanted was deeper, something that would strike at the very heart of their pride, the very foundation of the image they worshipped. So I began with information. I reached out to an old friend, Daniel, a lawyer who had once helped me with small legal matters when I was fighting to keep our apartment years ago. He owed me a favor, one I had never claimed. Over coffee, I asked him to discreetly look into the businesses owned by my daughters in-laws. He frowned at first, but when I explained that I suspected they were not as honest as they appeared, his expression shifted. Within a week, he returned with files that confirmed my suspicions. Behind the polished exterior of their wealth were debts hidden under layers of paperwork, loans they had barely managed to keep afloat, deals that skirted the line of legality. It was not enough to destroy them, but it was enough to weaken the foundation. The knowledge filled me with a strange satisfaction. They had painted me as weak, a burden, yet their empire was fragile, held together by appearances and deceit. But I needed more than financial cracks. I needed personal truths, secrets they would never want revealed. That is where observation became my weapon. I began attending events where I knew they would be present. I did not approach them, did not force myself into their circle. I simply watched, listened, collected fragments of conversations. I learned who they favored, who they despised, where their tempers slipped. I saw how my daughter's husband often drank too much, how his smile faltered when he thought no one was looking. I noted how his mother whispered sharply in his ear whenever he said something foolish, how his father's eyes darted with paranoia when business was mentioned. Each detail became a thread, and slowly, I began weaving a web. Yet even as I planned, their cruelty found new ways to reach me. One afternoon, as I walked home carrying groceries, I passed two women chatting by the corner store. I caught only part of their conversation, but it was enough to stop me in my tracks. "She is still hanging around," one of them said. "Her daughter has moved on. She should accept it and fade quietly." Fade quietly. That was what they all wanted. For me to disappear, to vanish into the background so their perfect story could shine without blemish. But I had no intention of fading. A week later, I received another message from my daughter. Short, clipped, polite in a way that stung more than open cruelty. "Mom, please understand that things are different now. I appreciate what you have done for me, but I need you to let me live my life with my husband's family. Do not involve yourself in matters that are not yours, not mine." Those words ignited something fierce inside me. I had given her life, given her everything I had, and now she dared to tell me that her life was no longer mine in any way. It was the final nail in the coffin of the person I had been. The grieving mother faded, and in her place stood someone colder, sharper, someone who would not be erased. That night, I took out a journal and began writing. Not for myself, but as a record, a weapon. I wrote every detail I remembered of the humiliations, the sacrifices, the insults. I wrote about the wedding, about the sign, about the dinner where I had been stripped of my name. I described every look, every whisper, every slight. The words poured out of me until my hand cramped, but I kept writing, because one day, these pages would serve as proof of what they had done. The act of writing gave me clarity. My revenge would not be loud at first. It would not be a confrontation in a room full of people. It would be slow, deliberate, unfolding like a story they never saw coming. The first step was simple: visibility. They wanted me invisible, erased from their world, so I began to appear more often, in places where they could not ignore me. At church, I took my seat in the front row. At community gatherings, I volunteered, placing myself in positions where my presence was undeniable. I smiled, I spoke, I engaged with others. People began to notice. The whispers about my humiliation started to shift into whispers of surprise. She seems stronger, I overheard one man say. After what happened, I thought she would disappear, but she looks different now. That was exactly what I wanted. At the same time, I continued gathering information. Daniel provided me with more legal documents, tracing the in-laws' business connections. I learned that one of their partners had recently been investigated for fraud. Another had quietly filed for bankruptcy. The cracks in their empire were widening, and they had no idea that I was the one studying every fracture. But information alone was not enough. I needed allies, people who could stand with me when the time came. And so, I began to reach out to distant relatives, the same ones who had called me after the wedding out of curiosity. This time, I told them pieces of the truth. Not everything, not yet, but enough to plant seeds of doubt. Do you know, I asked one cousin over the phone, that the family my daughter married into has more debt than wealth? Impossible, she replied. Look closer, I said, my voice steady. Things are not always as they seem. The cousin hesitated, and I knew the seed had taken root. Each conversation was like placing a stone in the foundation of the storm I was building. By the time I was ready, the ground beneath them would already be trembling. Yet through it all, there were nights when doubt crept in. I would sit alone, staring at the gift I had once prepared for my daughter, and wonder if I had become too hardened, if I was losing the last fragments of the mother I had been. But then I remembered the sign, the words carved into my heart, "You're not welcome here." And the doubt dissolved, because this was no longer only about me. It was about every mother who had been cast aside, every woman who had been told she was not enough, every sacrifice that had been ignored. My story was theirs too, and my revenge would be justice for all of us. By the end of that month, my plan had taken shape. I would strike at their reputation, the very thing they held most dear. I would expose the cracks in their empire, reveal the truths they had hidden, and force them to face the reality they had tried to bury under wealth and pride. But I would not rush. Timing was everything. Like a chess player, I would wait until every piece was in place, until every move was calculated. They believed I was finished. They believed I was broken. What they did not see was the woman standing in the shadows, watching, waiting, preparing. And when the moment came, they would never see it coming. The first time I saw the cracks appear, it was not in the form of a headline or a dramatic confrontation. It was something smaller, quieter, but to me it was monumental. It was proof that my plan was beginning to work. I had been patient, waiting for the right moment. I had gathered my documents, spoken carefully to relatives, and positioned myself back into the community where people could not so easily dismiss me. But revenge requires more than preparation. It requires a trigger, something that sets the chain reaction in motion. That trigger came one afternoon when I learned that my daughter's father-in-law, the man who carried himself like a king, was due to speak at a business luncheon. He would be addressing investors, presenting his company as stronger than ever. To the world, he was untouchable. To me, he was vulnerable. I did not attend the luncheon myself. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I made sure that certain whispers had already reached the right ears. Through a distant cousin who worked in accounting, I passed along enough information about questionable dealings in his company to raise eyebrows. Nothing solid, nothing that could be traced back to me, but enough to plant suspicion. On the day Of the luncheon, I waited at home, my nerves sharp as glass. When the call finally came from the same cousin, her voice trembled with excitement. "You will not believe what happened," she said. Midway through his speech, one of the investors stood up and questioned him about unpaid loans. The room fell silent. He tried to laugh it off, but you could see the panic. It was chaos. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a slow, steady breath. It had begun. That evening, I dressed and went to church, sitting in the front row as usual. People greeted me differently now, some with curiosity, others with caution, as though sensing something had changed in me. One woman leaned in and whispered, "Did you hear about the luncheon today? It was a disaster." I nodded, my expression calm, as though I had only just learned. Inside, though, my heart burned with satisfaction. For years, I had been the subject of whispers. Now, it was their turn, but this was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, the cracks widened. A supplier suddenly pulled out of an agreement with the in-laws company, citing concerns about stability. Investors hesitated. Small articles appeared in the local paper, questioning whether their empire was as strong as it seemed. Meanwhile, I made sure that relatives continued to receive pieces of the story, not from me directly, but from others, in a way that seemed natural. Every time I spoke to someone, I gave them just enough to repeat, and repeat they did. By the time rumors reached my daughter's circle, they sounded like truth. I knew it was working when I saw my daughter for the first time in months. She was at the market, her husband by her side. She looked thinner, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. When she noticed me across the aisle, her expression tightened. I expected her to turn away, but instead she approached, her voice low, urgent. "Mom, have you heard what people are saying about his family?" I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "People say many things." Her husband stepped closer, his jaw tight. "It is lies, all lies. We know someone is spreading them." I looked at him calmly, refusing to flinch. "Then you should have nothing to fear." For a moment, his eyes narrowed, as though he suspected me. "But suspicion is not proof," and I gave him nothing to hold on to. He pulled my daughter away, muttering under his breath, and I watched them go with a mixture of sorrow and triumph. She was caught in the middle, yet she had chosen to stand with him. That choice would cost her dearly. Still, I reminded myself, this was not about destroying her. It was about dismantling the cage she had chosen, the gilded prison they had locked her in. But revenge, once set in motion, has a way of gaining momentum. One evening, as I sat with my journal open, documenting the latest developments, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Daniel, my lawyer friend, holding a folder. His expression was grim. "You were right," he said, stepping inside. "Their company is in deeper trouble than I thought. I pulled more records and they have been moving money through shell accounts. If this comes to light, it will not just be embarrassment. It could mean legal consequences." My breath caught. This was more than I had expected. I had hoped to tarnish their reputation, to expose their hypocrisy. But this was something darker, something that could unravel them completely. "Do you want me to take this further?" Daniel asked carefully. "If I hand this to the right people, it will set off a chain reaction you cannot control." For a moment, I hesitated. The mother in me still ached for my daughter, still feared what such a downfall would do to her. But then I remembered the sign at her wedding, the place card that erased my name, the letter that told me my life was no longer mine. I remembered every humiliation, every whisper, every cruel smile. "Yes," I said finally. "Take it further." The decision was like crossing a threshold. Once made, there was no going back. The next weeks unfolded like a storm gathering strength. Anonymous tips found their way to journalists. Small stories became larger ones. People who had once praised the family now kept their distance, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Invitations to events slowed. The perfect image they had built began to fracture, and I watched. I watched as their world tilted, as their pride cracked, as their certainty dissolved into fear. But I was not reckless. I did not reveal myself. I continued to smile politely at church, to walk calmly through the market, to nod when people whispered updates. Let them believe fate or chance had turned against them. Let them never suspect the hand that guided it all. Yet even as I relished their unraveling, I felt the weight of my daughter's silence. She did not call. She did not come to me. When I saw her once more, her eyes were red, her shoulders tense. She looked at me as though she wanted to speak, but but her husband's hand on her arm kept her silent. That moment pierced me more deeply than any of their humiliations, because in her silence, I saw her struggle. She was torn, yet she had chosen them still, and that choice meant she would fall with them. I returned home that night and sat by the window, staring at the darkness outside. I told myself this was justice, that she had made her choice, but the truth is, a part of me grieved. Revenge is not clean. It is fire, and fire consumes even what you wish to protect. Still, I could not stop. The storm had begun, and now it would rage until nothing was left standing. The cracks in their empire were no longer invisible. They were there for the world to see. And this was only the beginning. The storm I had set in motion no longer whispered. Through hidden corridors, it roared across the city like thunder. What began as subtle murmurs had now grown into something undeniable, something no one could ignore. It started with a headline. I was sitting at my kitchen table one morning when the paper slid through the mail slot. I opened it as I always did, not expecting much. But there it was, bold and unforgiving on the front page. Prominent family under investigation for financial misconduct. My breath caught. For a moment, I could only stare at the words. Then, I read on, each line confirming what Daniel had uncovered. The in-laws' empire, the glittering world they had paraded before everyone, was now being stripped bare. Investigators were questioning their loans, their shell accounts, their shady dealings. It was all there in black and white, and now the world knew. I folded the paper carefully, set it aside, and sat in silence. A strange mix of emotions swirled inside me. Satisfaction, yes, but also an ache. Because I knew my daughter would see this, she would feel the weight of it, and though part of me longed to protect her from that pain, another part whispered that she had chosen this path. By evening, the whispers had become open conversations. At church, I overheard women discussing the article. At the market, shopkeepers exchanged knowing glances. On the streets, people shook their heads as though a great betrayal had been uncovered. They were never as perfect as they pretended. One man said, "I always thought there was something off." Another replied, "The family that had once basked in admiration was now the subject of ridicule." Their name, once untouchable, was being dragged through mud. And then came the second blow. A television crew parked outside their estate, cameras rolling as reporters demanded answers. The father-in-law appeared briefly, his face pale, his voice trembling as he called the accusations false. But the footage betrayed him. The confidence he had always worn like armor was gone. His words rang hollow, his authority cracked. I watched the broadcast from my living room, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The image of him, once towering, now reduced to a man cornered, filled me with a grim sense of justice. This was what they deserved. This was the price of arrogance. But the fallout did not stop there. A week later, invitations that had always been extended to them stopped arriving. The grand galas, the charity events, the circles of power they had once dominated now closed their doors. Their empire was crumbling not just financially but socially. And in that world, social exile was wound deeper than any fine or debt. Through it all, I remained silent, a shadow moving quietly among them. No one suspected me. To them, I was the woman they had humiliated, the mother erased from her daughter's wedding. How could I, of all people, wield such power? That was the beauty of it. Their downfall came not from an enemy they could fight, but from a ghost they had already dismissed. Yet amidst their ruin, my daughter's silence weighed heavily on me. She did not call. She did not come to me. The only glimpses I had were from a distance, when I saw her hurriedly crossing the market or stepping into her car. Her shoulders were hunched, her face pale. She looked like a woman carrying the weight of a collapsing world. I told myself she had made her choice. I told myself she was reaping what she had sown. But at night, when I sat by the window with my journal open, I could not silence the ache in my chest. She was still my daughter. She was still the child I had held in my arms, the girl I had once promised to protect. And now she was caught in a fire she could not escape. The turning point came one evening when a relative called me, her voice trembling with excitement. "Did you see the news?" she asked. "No," I said calmly, though my heart raced. "There was a raid at their offices. Cameras everywhere. People are saying charges will follow." I thanked her and ended the call, then turned on the television. The images were brutal. Police officers carrying boxes of files, journalists swarming the scene, employees rushing out with fear in their eyes. The company that had once stood as a symbol of power now looked like the ruins of a battlefield. I leaned back in my chair, my chest rising and falling with slow breaths. This was more than I had envisioned. What had started as whispers of revenge had grown into a storm that consumed everything in its path, and there was no stopping it now. That night, as I lay in bed, my phone rang. My heart jolted when I saw the name on the screen. It was her, my daughter. For a moment, I hesitated, my finger hovering over the answer button. Then I pressed it. Mom, her voice broke on the other end, raw with exhaustion. I do not know who else to call. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. I am here. They are saying horrible things about his family. Everywhere we go, people stare. Reporters are outside the house day and night. I do not know what to do. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to say, this is what happens when you choose pride over love, when you turn your back on the one who raised you. But I could not. Instead, I listened, letting her pour out her fear, her anger, her confusion. When she finally fell silent, I said, you must decide what matters most. Their world is crumbling. Do you want to fall with them, or do you want to stand on your own? Her breath caught. For a moment, there was silence. Then she whispered, I do not know. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness, the phone heavy in my hand. Her call was not a reconciliation, not yet, but it was a crack in her loyalty, a sign that even she could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. The days that followed brought more chaos. Lawsuits were filed, assets were frozen, reporters dug deeper, uncovering more layers of deceit. The family fought desperately to hold on to their empire, but every move they made only revealed more weakness, and through it all, I remained steady, calm, a silent witness. I had become what they never expected, a force they could not see, could not fight, could not erase. Yet inside me, two battles raged. One was the satisfaction of revenge, the justice of watching arrogance brought low. The other was the ache of a mother, watching her child suffer in silence. But I had crossed the threshold long ago. There was no turning back. The storm was here, and it would not end until everything they had built was reduced to rubble. The air in my living room felt heavier than usual. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft glow that could not chase away the tension in my chest. I had prepared myself for this moment without knowing exactly when it would come. I knew my daughter could not avoid me forever, and the collapse of her in-law's world had forced her hand. The knock at the door came suddenly, shattering the quiet. I rose slowly, smoothing my hands over my dress, as though the act itself could steady my nerves. My heart pounded with anticipation. I had not seen her in weeks, not since the headlines and the relentless media frenzy. I opened the door. Her eyes met mine, wide and red-rimmed. She was dressed plainly, far from the glamorous image she usually projected. But her presence, her vulnerability struck me harder than any grand gesture ever could. Mom, she said, her voice trembling, barely more than a whisper. I need to talk to you. I stepped aside silently, allowing her to enter. The familiar scent of her perfume, now faint and understated, reminded me of childhood mornings, of small hands reaching for mine, of laughter that had once filled these walls. But that was the past. Now, everything was charged with tension, with unspoken words that had festered for months. She seated herself on the couch, her posture tight, her hands clasped together as if holding herself together from within. I sat opposite her, maintaining calm, letting the weight of silence speak first. I don't even know where to start, she murmured. Start wherever you need, I said softly. I am listening. Her eyes welled up. Everything is falling apart, Mom. Their empire, their reputation, their lives. People are talking. I can hear it wherever I go. Reporters are outside, asking questions I don't even know the answers to. And her voice broke, and she pressed her hands to her face. I leaned forward. Breathe, speak slowly. You do not have to carry it alone. She lowered her hands but did not look at me. I don't know why you stayed away that day, at the wedding. Why you walked away. I kept thinking maybe you hated me. Maybe you never wanted me there. And now everything is falling apart, and I realize I should have listened to you. But I didn't. I chose them over you. And her words were jagged, heavy with guilt and fear. I felt my heart tighten, recognizing the pain that came from betrayal, from misguided loyalty. Do you believe that walking away from me protected you? I asked quietly. Do you believe siding with them brought you safety? Her head dropped. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want to upset anyone. I didn't want to be in the middle of your world and theirs, and yet, in the middle you still ended up, didn't you? I replied, caught between choices you could not control and consequences you refused to see. Her eyes finally met mine, shimmering with unshed tears. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stop the lies, how to tell them they were wrong, that I wanted to be with you. I leaned back, letting the words settle between us. You wanted to be loyal to the illusion. You wanted to protect what you thought was security, comfort, and power. But loyalty is not bought or borrowed. It is earned, and it is chosen. And you, my daughter, chose a path that abandoned me. She flinched at my words, as if the truth itself had stung her. I know now, she whispered. I see now that I was blind, and I am sorry. I cannot undo what I did, but I don't want to lose you. I never did. I was too proud to admit it. The room seemed to constrict with the intensity of the moment. This was more than an apology. It was the first crack in a wall that had been built with years of pride, hurt, and miscommunication. I saw her fear, her desperation, and the weight of choices she could no longer deny. I cannot pretend the past did not happen, I said softly. I cannot erase the day you turned your back on me, the words, the doors you closed. But I can choose to listen to you now. I can choose to hear what your heart says today, not what your pride dictated then. Her shoulders sagged. Relief, guilt, and fear mingled in her expression. I don't know if I can fix anything. I feel like everything is falling apart and I am powerless. You are not powerless, I said. You have the power to decide who you want to be now, not who you were told to be. You can step out of their shadow, step away from their lies, and reclaim your place in a life that belongs to you as well as me. She wiped a tear from her cheek. But Mom, they will hate me. They will never forgive me. I have been their puppet for so long, and now I don't even know who I am without them. You are yourself, I said. You are my daughter. And being yourself sometimes means standing apart from those who seek to control you. It is not easy, and it is not free from pain, but it is the only way to live honestly. Her hands trembled. In her lap. I don't know if I have the courage. You do, I said firmly. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is taking action despite the fear. Look around you. Their world is crumbling. You see the truth. You feel the weight of choices. The courage to act is already within you. You simply need to embrace it. Her gaze softened, uncertainty mixed with determination. You really think I can do this? I know you can, I said. But you must choose it for yourself, not because anyone else expects it of you. This is your life, your family, your choices, and your mistakes do not define you unless you let them. We sat in silence, the tension easing slightly. Her presence no longer felt like an intrusion but like the fragile bridge between past and future, between mistakes and redemption. Finally, she spoke again. I want to try. I want to stand with you, not against you. I don't want to be part of their lies anymore. I reached across the space between us and took her hand. Then we start here, together. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, just here, just now. A shaky but genuine smile crossed her face. Together, she echoed. The weight in the room shifted, a subtle but undeniable change. The daughter who had turned away from me at her wedding was now returning, not with demands or excuses, but with a willingness to rebuild what had been broken. Outside, the world continued its chaos. Headlines screamed, the media buzzed, and the crumbling empire of her in-laws grew more unstable by the hour. But inside my home, in this quiet room, we found a different kind of storm, the storm of truth, reconciliation, and the first tentative steps toward healing. I could see it in her eyes, fear mingled with resolve, guilt mingled with hope. She was no longer just the daughter who had abandoned me. She was someone ready to reclaim her identity, her voice, and her place in a life that mattered more than wealth, power, or appearances. That night, as she left my home, I watched her walk away, taller, straighter, more determined than she had been in months. I knew there would be challenges ahead. I knew her loyalty would continue to be tested. But for the first time since that devastating day at the wedding, I felt the fragile promise of connection returning between us, and I knew, deep in my heart, that whatever storms lay ahead, we would face them together. The morning air was crisp. As I stepped outside, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my heart, the headlines were already circulating, flashing my daughter's name alongside scandalous claims and whispers of betrayal. The media frenzy had grown beyond control, and every reporter who had ever called suddenly had cameras trained on her every move. I could feel the weight of judgment pressing down, not only on her, but on me as well. She arrived shortly after, hesitant but resolute, walking toward me with a determination that I had never seen before. The pain of the wedding day still lingered, but something had shifted. Her steps carried a newfound courage, and the fear in her eyes had been replaced by resolve. "Mom," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor underneath. "I need to do this. I need to face them and end this madness." I nodded. "Then we do it together. No running, no hiding. We confront the truth head on." The mansion loomed before us, a fortress of illusions that had once seemed untouchable. The in-laws were already outside, flanked by lawyers and security, their faces hard, frozen in disbelief and anger. The contrast between them and my daughter could not have been sharper. One side radiating cold entitlement, the other vulnerability paired with quiet power. They did not expect her to arrive, and their expressions shifted from disdain to shock when they saw her walking confidently toward them. The cameras caught every moment, flashing lights and clicking shutters punctuating the tension in the air. Her father-in-law stepped forward first, his voice booming. "You have no right to be here. You cannot undo what has already happened." She lifted her chin, standing taller than I had ever seen her. "I am here because the truth cannot be hidden any longer. Your lies, your schemes, and the control you tried to exert end today. I will not be part of it anymore." The words were like lightning striking the fragile equilibrium they had maintained. Their faces tightened, their carefully constructed world beginning to crack under the weight of exposure. "You think you can just come here and claim victory?" The mother-in-law spat, her tone dripping with venom. "Do you understand the consequences of what you are doing?" "I understand everything," my daughter said firmly. "I understand that I was manipulated, silenced, and made to believe that loyalty meant abandoning my own family. But I will not live like that anymore. I choose my mother, my truth, and my life." The shock on their faces was palpable. The in-laws' empire, built on power and influence, had never been challenged like this. My daughter's words were not just defiance. They were a declaration of independence, a severing of chains that had bound her. The father-in-law's fists clenched. "You think you can turn your back on us and it will end well for you?" "I am not turning my back on anyone," she replied calmly. "I am stepping into my own life. I am reclaiming the person I lost when I let you dictate my choices. You had your chance to manipulate me, and I rejected it. Now speak my truth, and I will no longer be silenced." The lawyers whispered urgently to the in-laws, but no words could match the gravity of the confrontation. Every camera captured the moment, the tension, the raw honesty that radiated from my daughter. This was no longer a private dispute. The world was watching. She turned to me then, her eyes glistening but unwavering. "Mom, I need you by my side, not just for me, but for everything that we stand for. I will not let their lies control me or define who we are." I stepped forward, placing my hand gently over hers. "I am here, always, and this time, you will not face it alone." The mother-in-law's face twisted with rage. "You will regret this. Mark my words. You will lose everything if you continue down this path." "I will not lose myself," my daughter said, her voice rising, resonating with conviction. "I will not allow fear, manipulation, or greed to dictate my life. You built a house of cards, and now it is collapsing. But I am still standing, and I am choosing what matters most, my family, my truth, and my future." The father-in-law turned pale. "This is not over," he growled. "You will pay for your insolence." She shook her head. "No, you will see that your power ends where my courage begins. Your empire thrives on secrecy and fear, but the world sees the truth now. And I am free." The cameras flashed like lightning, capturing every detail. The anger, the fear, the defiance, and the triumph. The media had a story of betrayal, confrontation, and the ultimate choice of one daughter to reclaim her life. For the first time, the in-laws' carefully curated image was vulnerable. They could no longer control the narrative, and their attempts to intimidate my daughter fell flat against the undeniable force of her resolve. I could see her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the enormity of the moment. This was the culmination of months of heartbreak, regret, and reflection. The daughter who had once turned away had returned stronger, armed with truth and the unwavering support of her mother. She took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving theirs. "You taught me fear, control, and manipulation. But you did not teach me loyalty, love, or courage. I am reclaiming those lessons now. I am choosing to live honestly, and nothing you say or do can take that from me. The mother-in-law's lips quivered. The father-in-law's jaw clenched. Their empire, built on intimidation and illusion, was unraveling in front of them. Every camera, every observer, every whisper of the crowd bore witness to their downfall. My daughter turned to me again. Mom, thank you for believing in me even when I could not believe in myself. Thank you for waiting, for staying strong, and for never giving up. We face this together, and nothing will break us. I squeezed her hand. We are stronger than fear, stronger than lies, stronger than anyone who tries to control our lives. Today, we reclaim what was always ours, our dignity, our family, and our truth. The in-laws stared at us, stunned into silence, unable to counter the force of our conviction. They had expected weakness, tears, and submission. What they received instead was the unyielding power of a daughter standing beside her mother, refusing to be silenced, refusing to be controlled. The crowd watching from a distance sensed the shift, the tide turning from scandal to empowerment. Reporters scrambled to capture the words, the tension, the drama. My daughter's voice carried beyond the estate, reaching ears that had long awaited a story of courage and justice. Finally, she turned and walked past the in-laws, her head held high, her steps confident. I followed her, matching her stride, feeling the weight of months of pain and anxiety lift with every step. We were no longer victims of their manipulation. We were survivors, warriors, and witnesses to our own strength. As we drove away, the mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror, my daughter reached over and took my hand. Mom, we did it. We finally did it. Yes, I said, my voice firm with certainty. And nothing can take this from us. Nothing. That day marked the turning point. The public reckoning had exposed the lies, the betrayal, and the crumbling empire of those who had sought to control her. But it also marked the triumph of courage, the power of truth, and the unbreakable bond between mother and daughter. The world could watch, judge, and speculate. But we knew the reality of what had happened. We had faced the storm, confronted the lies, and emerged victorious. Together, and in that victory, we found not just freedom, but a renewed sense of purpose, love, and unshakable strength that would carry us into the future, unafraid of whatever challenges awaited. The morning after the confrontation, I woke with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. The air was lighter, as if the weight of years of betrayal, lies, and disappointment had lifted from my shoulders. My daughter had been quiet in the early hours, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, staring out at the horizon. I could see the faint traces of sleepless nights etched on her face, but her eyes held a clarity, a resolve, that was unshakable. We had survived the storm together, and now the aftermath stretched before us. The media frenzy had not calmed, but the narrative had shifted. Our story was no longer about scandal, but about courage, truth, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter. It was a story of empowerment, and it belonged to us. She turned to me, her voice quiet but firm. Mom, I don't think I've ever felt so free. I never realized how much their control had shaped my life until it was gone. I reached over, placing my hand on hers. You were never truly theirs to control. You always had the strength to choose, even when fear and doubt clouded your vision. Today, you proved that to yourself and everyone watching. She nodded, taking a deep breath as if finally exhaling the tension of the last months. I want to rebuild, not just my life, but our lives. I want to take what we've learned and use it to create something positive, something that reflects who we truly are. The idea resonated deeply. For so long, we had been defined by others' expectations, their schemes, and their attempts to manipulate us. Now, the power to shape our future was ours and ours alone. We spent the day reaching out to friends and family who had been on the sidelines, offering support and encouragement. Messages poured in from people who had witnessed the confrontation, inspired by our courage, and grateful for the reminder that it was never too late to reclaim one's life. Each message strengthened our resolve, reminding us that standing up for oneself could have a ripple effect far beyond our own circle. In the afternoon, we returned to the mansion one last time. The estate was eerily quiet, the grandeur of the property overshadowed by the absence of the in-laws, who had retreated behind their walls of anger and humiliation. We walked through the halls, not with malice or resentment, but with a sense of closure. Every room held memories, some painful, some trivial, but none powerful enough to bind us anymore. This was their kingdom, I said softly, built on control and fear. But it is empty now, stripped of its power over us. My daughter smiled. A mixture of triumph and relief. It's almost poetic. They thought this place could define our lives. Instead, it became the stage where we reclaimed our strength. We took a final walk through the gardens, the flowers in full bloom, vibrant and unrestrained. The sunlight glinted off the dew, illuminating the path ahead. I realized then that nature itself seemed to celebrate our emancipation, offering beauty and renewal as a metaphor for our journey. That evening, we sat together in the living room of my daughter's apartment, away from the chaos, with only the soft hum of the city outside to remind us that life was moving forward. We spoke openly about our fears, our regrets, and the lessons we had learned. There was no anger, only understanding, reflection, and a commitment to guard our hearts against future betrayal. I've spent so long trying to please everyone. My daughter confessed that I forgot to listen to my own heart. I let their voices drown out my own. Today, I finally heard it again. I nodded, feeling tears well up in my eyes. And that is why we survived. Because you remembered who you are and who we are together. That is a power they could never take from us. We laughed, quietly at first, then more freely, releasing months of tension, grief, and frustration. It was a sound of healing, a declaration that life was not over, and that joy could exist even after deep pain. The next few days were a blur of conversations, interviews, and supportive calls. The public had embraced our story, sharing it widely as an example of resilience and integrity. But more importantly, the private world we had reclaimed our home, our time, and our freedom felt infinitely more valuable than any recognition or attention. One afternoon, as we were sorting through boxes of old photos and letters, my daughter paused, holding up a picture of the two of us from years ago, before the betrayals, before the manipulation. We've been through so much, she said softly, and yet we're still standing. We're stronger now than we ever were then. Yes, I agreed, because we faced the truth together. We didn't run. We didn't compromise who we are, and we refused to be silent. That strength will carry us forward, no matter what comes next. She hugged me tightly, a warm, lingering embrace that conveyed gratitude, love, and the deep sense of connection that had been tested but never broken. Thank you for never giving up on me, Mom. Thank you for showing me that love is not conditional on obedience or fear. You taught me how to be brave, and you taught me how to trust that love can overcome any obstacle, I replied. That lesson is more precious than anything else. As evening fell, we lit candles in memory of the pain we had endured and the courage we had found. Each flame represented a moment of choice, a decision to stand firm, and a commitment to live authentically. The flickering light illuminated our faces, casting a gentle glow on the smiles that reflected resilience, empowerment, and hope. We talked late into the night, planning our future projects, ideas for helping others who had been silenced or manipulated, and ways to build a life defined by our values rather than the whims of others. The energy in the room was one of creation, renewal, and determination. We were no longer defined by the past. We were architects of our future. As I watched my daughter sleep that night, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been painful, dramatic, and at times unbearable, but we had emerged stronger, wiser, and unshakably united. Every challenge we had faced, every tear shed, and every moment of doubt had led us to this point of clarity and empowerment. The next morning, we awoke to the world with a renewed sense of purpose. We embraced the ordinary moments: coffee on the balcony, walks in the park, quiet conversations, knowing that true life was found in these small acts of presence and connection. We were free to love, to dream, and to create without fear. Our story became a symbol, not of conflict, but of triumph. People admired our courage, shared in our victories, and drew inspiration from our refusal to be silenced. Yet, more importantly, we knew the truth of our experience. The journey had been ours, and the lessons learned were priceless. As we stood together one last time, looking out at the horizon that stretched before us, my daughter took my hand. Mom, we made it. We faced the storm, and now the world is ours to shape. Yes, I said, holding her hand tightly. And no one can ever take this from us. We are free, we are strong, and we are unstoppable. In that moment, the past no longer held power over us. The betrayals, the heartbreak, and the manipulation had all been transformed into lessons, courage, and strength. Together, we had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, unbroken, empowered, and ready for whatever the future might hold. And as we walked forward into the new day, I realized that the greatest victory was not in exposing the lies or confronting the enemies. It was in reclaiming our lives, our hearts, and our unshakable bond. That was the legacy we would carry forever, a testament to resilience, love, and the unwavering power of truth.